All right, it's my pleasure to be here with George Holloway, composer from England,
Yeah.
from Bristol. Welcome, George.
Well, welcome to my flat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about yourself and where you grew up and what you're doing now.
I grew up in Bristol, in England, and was there, until I was 18, and then I've lived in Oxford, Southampton, Beijing, and now I live in Tianjin in China, which is not far away from Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now I teach at Tianjin Conservatory of Music. I have been teaching there for 4 years, in the composition department. And I also do some children's choir conducting. I've taught at the Grand Theatre in Tianjin, and when their children's choir stopped existing earlier this year, I set up my own children's choir. So we've just done our first concert with my own children's choir in Tianjin.
Good, good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, George, tell us how you got into composition.
It happened naturally, really. I started music on the recorder and then took up the cornet. And I just remember when I was very young, I took a piece in which I wrote myself. And at that point, I don't think I had the concept of a composer or composition. It was just something that I spontaneously did. That piece obviously is long lost. But then it was just always something that I was interested in doing, and it happened spontaneously. So when I started learning the piano, I started writing songs or little pieces of music very, very quickly. And again, I'd take them in to show my teacher. And in my teens, I took up the guitar and learned to write pop songs. I'd use Paul Weller songbooks and Manic Street Preachers songbooks and Nirvana, that kind of thing, and sort of learn from that. And then it was much later on that I started having a kind of formal training in composition. I had my first composition teacher was a wonderful person called David Selwyn, and he was actually an English teacher at my school in Bristol Grammar School. But he was also a composer, and I think his undergraduate degree had been music, but then he was always interested in literature, and so later on pursued a career as an English teacher. But always kept up the conducting. He conducted Bristol Opera and wrote operas as well for Bristol Opera. And one day I showed him a piano piece which I'd written, which was called Reverie, I think. And I showed that to him, and I remember him looking at it for about 30 seconds and then saying, hey, "This is quite good, actually." And that was sort of the first commendation I'd really had from someone. And then he just gave me he said, "Okay, let's meet every week, and we'll have a lesson together." No discussion of pay or anything. And every week he'd just bring a different score and a recording. And so that was my first opportunity to hear Schoenberg, Pierre Lunaire, which at the time baffled me, and I couldn't really get on very well with that. Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a theme of Thomas Tallis as well. And those are the two pieces I can remember. But he was a real inspiration to me. And then from there on, I just never really had any doubt that composition was the thing I wanted to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you told me that your undergraduate degree wasn't actually music.
Yeah.
You went into music as a master's degree student, and then you did a doctorate.
Yeah, I did music A-level in 1 year with the year above me. I can't even remember why that came up. It was just something which someone suggested. I can't remember how it came about, but I ended up doing music A-level with the year above me. And then obviously at that point it was around the time when I was having to decide what to apply to do at university, and I asked my teacher, I asked some various people, and the general feedback was that you don't necessarily have to do a music degree to be a composer. And you know, people would bring up examples. Elgar did law or whatever.
Yeah.
Did Stravinsky do law as well? I think
almost everybody did law.
Yeah,
didn't they?
yeah. I know that there are. I've forgotten. I know that there are examples of composers who did medicine. So I thought, okay, well, at that time I had some really inspiring teachers of Latin and Greek. I was really into Latin and Greek and philosophy and all of those ancient literature really interested me. So I applied to do classics. But while I was doing my classics degree, I was still singing in choirs and still writing music. So it was doable. When I went to do the masters, and sort of turned myself from a classicist into a musician, there was quite a lot of catching up to do, actually. It took many years to really feel like I was actually a musician. You know, I had that kind of imposter complex there for a long time. So I think if I were advising my younger self, I suppose I'd still advise him to make the same decision, but maybe focus a bit more on learning harmony and counterpoint earlier on in life, probably.
Cool.
Yeah.
And did the classics and philosophy and those subjects, did that affect your composition? Did that?
Indirectly, I'm sure it has. Obviously, literature is a really important source of inspiration for composers, and I think there are certain. I mean, classics is obviously essentially the study of the foundation of European culture. So, in a sense, I felt like I was learning about the starting point of European culture, out of which everything else came later, including music, including Western music. So for me, it's not a completely disconnected relationship. Yeah. And I think the philosophy is important because I took some papers in aesthetics. And I think you can't, I mean, my notion of composition is that you have to have a kind of aesthetic thinking behind the piece that you're writing. It can't simply just be a kind of technical spinning out of notes, which work by virtue of the fact that you're using techniques you've learnt before. I mean, that has, for me, in my own composition, I'm driven to find my own reasons for doing things and to try and find new ways of expressing ideas through music. And so philosophy is obviously very important for that. I think musical composition, in many ways, is a kind of philosophical thinking.
How do you go about composing?
How do I go about composing?
Yeah.
I clean my flat. I mean, when I write a new piece, the first thing I do is basically clean the flat because I need to get rid of all the distractions around me. So if something's not tidy, then I have to do that first before I can compose. So there's a lot of kind of literal and metaphorical kind of clearing out of all the mess around me, and it is also a kind of mental mess as well that you have to clear out.
Okay.
Yeah, but I suspect that's not really what you were asking me.
I think, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I have seen you compose in Starbucks as well.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a bad habit actually. I think it's partly I like the stimulation of having lots of people around, kind of bustle, people walking in and out. I find that for some reason I find that a good place to be sitting and thinking. And I know that some people kind of put on recordings of white noise or something to when they want to concentrate. Maybe having kind of all that noise around me helps me to go into a kind of internal world a bit more easily. But then once I've got the flow, once I know what I'm doing, and I've got a purpose, I've got a kind of sense of structure for the piece, then I'll come back to my flat and I'll sit here and I'll turn off my phone and I can be in silence. And that's actually not a problem at all. It's that initial stage of kind of getting myself into that state which is difficult, I find.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you do every day by force of habit?
No. No, it's not. I know that there are people who do work like that. Philip Glass said famously that he had a lot of friends when he was a student who were as talented or even more talented than he was, but the thing that helped lift him above them was the fact that he had this routine where he would write every day, and he's done that for decades. He's done that his entire life. And yeah, I know that's a really important thing to try and cultivate. I know that you sort of have that kind of routine as well. But I find that with my work, I'm kind of divided into 5 different people a lot of the time. In the past I have had a leadership position in the conservatory, being head of composition, and that is obviously a huge diversion. And teaching the children's choir, where you have to, when you're not there, you're still having to choose repertoire, having to think about individual singers, give them individual feedback on auditions they've taken, that kind of thing. So as with everyone, there are lots of distractions which militate against having that daily routine. Yeah, I wish I could do that actually. Yeah.
Oh, then we all.
Yeah.
All right. Well, when you teach composition,
Yeah.
how do you go about it? How do you start actually teaching it?
Are you talking about a one-on-one composition tutorial? Or
yeah, for me, because that's something that I've always seen it as kind of like learning composition as being with a kind of a teacher, and the teacher would take our pieces to the teachers, and then the teacher would kind of make comments about what we said, and then maybe give us some music to go away and listen to. What do you do with your students?
Well, when I start with a new student, it actually takes a good few weeks, it takes a good few classes to get to know the student, and with different students the process of familiarization can take longer or shorter amount of time, depending on how much feedback they give you. I've had students where I've taught them for 2 years, and I've sort of felt, even after 2 years, I don't quite know how to get through to them, But then there are others who are very good at giving me feedback about the things I'm giving them. So it's a very individual process. I think that's what I want to underline, really. The things that they've experienced in the past will all be very different. Their personality is different, their way of thinking, their work habits, it's all different. And their goals are different. I mean, I've had a student who I think if he just ended up being a hip-hop producer, I think he'd be kind of quite happy with that, you know, or a sort of hip hop producer slash film music composer. So I obviously had to, on the one hand, find things which will excite him, because you have to try and excite your students. You have to make them kind of really want to work and want to learn.
Okay.
But then you also have to you have to use your wisdom to try and push them in a direction that they might not naturally go in. So make them listen to things which they wouldn't normally listen to. Make them engage with things that they're resistant to.
And why would you do that?
Well, for growth. I mean, you want to... the things which you're naturally drawn to are not necessarily the most interesting or beneficial things. You just don't know it at the time. It's just a thing which you're really into at that point. When I was a teenager, I was really super into Thomas Adès, and I still think he's a brilliant composer. But actually, I needed someone to say, well, yeah, he's really brilliant, but why don't you try studying something else? Try studying some Brahms for a while or something. I think you need a teacher to have that greater wisdom than you have, to kind of nudge you in directions which they know are going to be good for you, but you're not necessarily inclined to go in.
Kind of like opening up their minds, sort of thing.
Yeah.
There are other composers and ways of doing things.
Yeah, because we're obviously restricted by our preferences. I think, yeah.
What has been your most successful favourite composition to date?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or your favourite, for that matter.
My favourite composition that I've written.
Or your most successful.
Or my most successful. It depends how you define success, doesn't it? Because do we define success by how satisfied we are with the piece, or is it an external success, kind of social success? I think one piece which just jumps to mind is Meltwater, a piece which I wrote for choir and orchestra, and it was part of the Adopt a Composer scheme in the UK, which is a scheme I think it's run by Making Music and funded by the PRSF.
What's that?
They Performing Rights Society Foundation.
Okay.
And then they have an arrangement with BBC Radio 3 that every year they will they'll broadcast an interview with the participants and broadcast an extract from the piece. Adopt a Composer basically marries up a composer and an ensemble. And in my case, I was matched up with Finchley Chamber Orchestra and Finchley Chamber Choir. And I wrote them this big piece, 20-minute piece for both ensembles, the choir and the orchestra, called Meltwater, all about climate change, talking about various aspects of climate change, the extinction of species, methane clathrate under the ocean, and all kinds of technical things, and it ends with this big kind of apocalyptic vision of kind of after the disintegration of civilization has happened. Yeah, but it was really, really powerful, and it was a real journey. It was absolutely a journey for us, because both ensembles started off suspicious and worried. What kind of piece am I going to produce for them? And then when they got the score, there'd be worries about, can we do this? Is this too hard? I made a lot of revisions, and that was a really useful process. The simplification process really making you question whether what you're doing, whether you're writing this really complicated thing, does it really need to be that complicated to express the thing you want to express?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and then finally the performance, which was fantastically powerful, and the audience loved it. The audience reaction was really great, and so as a whole process, taken as a whole, and in terms of my learning process and the growth of my relationship with the ensembles, I think that was one of the most satisfying pieces I've ever done. Yeah.
Do you have a recording of that?
Yeah.
That can be found on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on my website.
Okay.
Or you can find the link via my website.
Or I'll include that in the notes so people can find it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. What kind of pieces would you like to write in the future, or make in the future?
Oh, I'd really like to be able to write a big orchestral piece. But there are some obvious obstacles to that. One is having an orchestra willing to play it, willing to commission you, and also having the time and energy to put into that. And also maybe a little bit kind of the ability, the facility with writing for orchestra, which I'm still working on. I'm still looking at scores, still studying other composers' music, learning about how to write successfully for the orchestra.
Who are you studying, by the way?
Adès, Elliot Carter, Vaughan Williams. Recently I've been really interested in Vaughan Williams' music.
Alright.
Yeah.
English composer Vaughan Williams.
Yeah. Yeah. Really wonderful symphonist, actually. Really amazing symphonies. And also trying to listen to lots of American composers, because I was just in America. I was in America for 3 weeks, and I took part in 2 music festivals over there. And so I naturally met a lot of American composers and people who, just in the same way that if you grow up in the UK and you're listening to contemporary music in the UK, most of your influences will be British composers. And if you're in China, most of the music you're exposed to is Chinese. So for them, their world is populated by all these American composers who I don't know about. So it was a really interesting learning experience going over there, hearing all these new names, and so I wrote them all down, and I've been looking them up on YouTube. So I think listening is as important as looking. Actually, you need to do both. I think listening to recordings isn't enough to learn how to learn from them really fully. You have to look at the scores as well to see how. Yeah.
So that's something you recommend to our viewers?
Oh yeah, I mean I did that. I was doing that from when I was very young, actually, borrowing scores from Bristol Central Library, which is an amazingly well-stocked library. I actually don't know in general what libraries are like in other cities, but it was they obviously had someone in the library who was interested in contemporary music, because there were lots of orchestral scores of living composers, and every week I'd go down there on the way home from school and borrow 4 or 5 scores, and then I'd try and find the recordings as well. And then go back and follow the score and listen to the recording, and I do that repeatedly. I do that lots of times, and at the start you get lost. For example, when I was when I first discovered the Rise of Spring, because I actually had the chance to play French horn in a performance of the Rise of Spring when I was 14, which was incredible, unbelievable opportunity. I was 6th horn, and before that I got the score out of the library, got the recording, and I was trying to follow it through, and it has lots of changes of beat, lots of changes of time signature. I'd get lost, I'd have to keep going back, I wouldn't know where I was. So it's a really valuable experience, really valuable study tool actually, to follow scores, do lots of score reading. Yeah.
Okay. And what about Chinese scores? I mean, as you said, you're in China. Well, we're in China.
Yeah.
Have you looked at many Chinese scores? Have you listened to much Chinese music? And has that influenced your music itself?
Yeah, I have. It definitely has. I think you have to go to different places to discover just how much style is kind of limited by place. So there's definitely a Chinese style, there's definitely a British style, there's definitely an Eastern European style, and obviously they're not clear-cut boundaries, but there's definitely a sort of way of writing music in China which is different and distinctive. And I did have this idea that I wanted to write a book about Chinese composers, which I still want to try and do at some point. Because there's been a lot of focus on the first few generations of composers after the Cultural Revolution, but I think there are lots of younger composers who are very interesting and really need to be researched and known by people in the West. So I'd like to do some work on that.
I think Stephen Jones is doing some like we both know Stephen Jones.
Yeah.
Is it Brigham
Young University? Yeah, he's writing. I think it's going to be a huge book. He's been researching it already for 2 or 3 years, and that's going to be a really important contribution. But I think he is still focusing on that generation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's the generation of Chen Yi, Zhou Long, Chen Qigang, Guo Wenjing, these composers. There are many others who I haven't mentioned. But I think if you go, say, 10 years younger than that, or even 20 years, 30 years, you're finding a really rich seam of composers who are doing really interesting, original things, and they're finding ways of working within Chinese society. Finding ways of being individual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course we know many of them personally.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. And composers younger than me, younger than us, who are really exciting and interesting as well. Yeah.
I've seen a couple of heard and seen a couple of your pieces on YouTube.
Yeah.
One was Pied Beauty.
Yeah.
And the other one was Cao Chong Wei's The Elephant.
Yeah.
Can you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about those?
Well, they're both pieces for children, written for children, and it's something which I've become more and more interested in, really. I mean, 4 years ago, I wouldn't have guessed that I would be teaching a children's choir or even running my own children's choir, and it was not something I'd thought about much before. And actually I've realised it is something you definitely have to think about as a composer, how you engage with the really youngest people in society and get them excited about music. So Pied Beauty was commissioned by Chen Qigang, the French-Chinese composer, who runs a summer school down in Zhejiang province. And it's an amazing thing that he does down there. He gets people from the countryside, the children from the countryside in Zhejiang, involved in this summer school, teaches them music, gets them singing in a choir, and then he gets good composers, or, me, to write pieces for the summer school. And then he gets really good players to come and accompany the children. So it was actually for children's choir and string orchestra, and the string orchestra was made up of students from the Central Conservatory in Beijing, and then some students who study abroad as well, the Royal Academy in London.
Right, so it sounds like a high level of...
The string group, was very high level, yeah. So it was an interesting challenge, really, writing for children who perhaps can't even read notation very well, and have perhaps limited control of vocal control.
Were they good or were they naughty?
Well, I didn't. I can imagine they were good. I mean, I can because it was conducted by my conducting teacher Chen Lin. Chen Lin is a professor at the Central Conservatory. I was very honoured and lucky to be able to study with her for a year, and knowing what she's like as a teacher, I know that she had a firm handle on those children. Yeah, yeah. So. Yeah, that was a really great experience to write for them.
Yeah, a couple of months back I saw your Cao Chong Wei's The Elephant.
Yeah.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Half an hour. Half an hour opera for children's choir. So there's this sort of phrase, children's opera, which is ambiguous because it can mean an opera written for children to watch. And then it can also mean an opera written with roles for children. And I was very clear that what I wanted to write for my children's choir, was a piece which largely involved the whole choir singing most of the time. So that's why I call it an opera for children's choir. And it was very generously funded by the by Tianjin Tianjin city government. I was on this scheme called the 1,000 Young Talent Scheme, and so the money for the production was provided through the scheme. Yeah, so you came and saw it. Did you like it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. The thing that I found most interesting, I think your music's kind of very modern. I don't mean kind of...
You mean kind of challenging, do you? Or...
No, I don't even mean challenging. I mean you kind of look for modern ways of expressing yourself. You don't necessarily use functional harmony. That is kind of the chords that you maybe find in Beethoven, Mozart, or even the romantic composers. You tend to have your own approach to things. And the thing that I found interesting was that you're using a modern way of writing music, with modern music styles, and actually children were performing this, whereas typically one would think children would do things like nursery rhymes, or they'd be able to do things that are got a very traditional or logical melody, whereas your pieces don't follow traditional mold. How did you marry those two things together, the children and modern music?
I'm just looking around for the score. Okay, there is functional harmony in here. I'll just give you an example. Okay, the first song that the choir sing. I mean, you just said that there's no... I wasn't using functional harmony. I mean, actually, it is pretty functional. Let's just take the first song that the choir sing. Okay. So it's in G major, and the first two bars are just alternating between chords 1 and 5. So it's actually... and then a chord 4, and then chord 1. So, but within that, I'm trying to find unconventional ways of structuring the phrases. So the first phrase is a 3-bar phrase. And then the second phrase has a change of time signature, so it goes from 4 beats in the bar to 3 beats in the bar. So the next phrase is... I'm trying to find ways of making the music interesting while writing something which children can learn.
Okay.
And it worked. It worked fine. I mean, the funny thing is, I think that composers will worry about writing slightly complicated things for children. But actually, because I knew that I had to teach this. I knew that whatever I wrote, I had the horrible job of making the children do it. So that's a really interesting mind-focusing exercise, because as I was writing it, I was thinking all the time, how am I going to teach this to the children? What method or what way of explaining it am I going to use? Sometimes you just don't explain it. You just say, okay, here's how it goes, and you sing it, and you say, okay, sing it back to me, and they just do it. So they just learn it by rote, and no one's putting their hand up saying, it changed time signature, why did it do that? You know, they're just learning the thing naturally.
Okay.
And I know that works. You know, I've been in. Just to use a slightly different example, I've travelled in Greece, and I've been to islands in Greece, and I've been at parties in villages on Greek islands late at night, where everyone is drunkenly singing folk songs in 7/8, and no one's finding it difficult at all. And it's because it's part of the tradition, obviously, hymns are the same. You know, in Wales, where my mum lives, where I go back to twice a year, I'll go to the church in Wales, and I'll hear the congregations singing in harmony. And usually it's not very in tune, but they manage to, you know, they sing in harmony, and a lot of the congregation members have learnt the harmonies over decades, over an entire lifetime of singing these hymns. Actually, I don't think these sorts of complexities are necessarily a problem. And for this piece, Cao Chong Wei's The Elephant, I did a suite, basically. I took the choral songs out of the opera and made a condensed suite of the choruses, and we did it again this semester. And there were lots of new children in the class, but because there were enough children who had sung it back in January, doing the new version, they learnt it within 2 days. Everyone learnt it within 2 days. So that really helps if you've got people who have already learnt it before. You get the kind of transmission of knowledge between people. Yeah.
Okay. Have you got the score for Pied Beauty as well?
I have. That's harder to find. Oh no, I have got it. Here it is. Yeah.
Would you mind taking us through that?
Pied Beauty. Well, Pied Beauty. It's what aspect do you want me to talk about?
What I personally like is that at the beginning of the piece, it sounds very kind of almost kind of sinister, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
It's kind of very dark.
Yeah.
And then you kind of got this children's choir. It's like,
yeah.
Kind of made me think almost of Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall.
This chord, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, obviously it's an 11th chord, basically. I knew that I knew that the string orchestra would be very, very good. So I wanted to write a piece where the melody would work very naturally for the children. It has lots of sequences in it which are very easy to remember. So phrases which repeat at different pitch levels. Mm-hmm. For example, this. And then in the next phrase, I don't change the rhythm. I just I shift it all down. And then at the end, it has a slightly different ending, just to finish it off differently. But if you write something like that, then children learn it in 10 seconds, basically, because it's so natural. And then underneath, you can be more adventurous with the accompaniment that you write with the orchestra. So I knew that this is basically the melody. So I knew that I wanted this kind of almost religious awe-inspired, awe-struck kind of opening. So you can write a chord like that, and it won't put the children off too much, because the top note of the chord is the note that they come in on anyway. So that's easy enough for them to find. And then their melody is just a really simple stepwise. Yeah, so keeping the material that the children do simple enough, and also writing into the accompaniment ways for the children to find their notes is really important.
So, in other words, correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah,
you can have a complicated background.
Yeah.
However, what you did was you kept the melody simple.
Yeah.
And also you looked for ways so that the background would tie into the melody.
Yeah.
So like the top note of the chord would
Yeah.
provide the first note that the children would sing.
Yeah, I do that a few times in the piece. Later on when they... in this middle section, in F minor, there's a sudden change of key. So we go from E major to F minor, so it sort of shifts up a semitone. Now the worry is, how are the children going to find the F at the start? So I have this chord which is the pivot chord, it's the chord that changes key. And then I just stick the F in the strings, in the string parts, just before the children come in, so they get the F before they come in. Just a simple trick like that. Yeah.
So essentially you were writing for two different levels of two different skill levels, like a very advanced string section, and children who might have some experience, but obviously not as much as somebody who would go to.
And it's the same in Cao Chong Wei's The Elephant as well. The Dizi, the guzheng and the piano parts are all super hard.
So the Dizis are Chinese flutes.
Yeah, a Chinese bamboo flute.
The guzheng is a
like a zither, yeah.
Like a koto.
Yeah, like a Japanese koto, yeah. And then obviously the piano. And there are some super hard bits of piano writing in there. So you can have those different things combined and in the same piece happening at the same time. Yeah. And then that means that you can have relatively simple things for the children, but the music is still very rich and interesting for the audience.
So here we go. What one thing should a composer do every day to be a better composer? Just one thing. What one thing?
Put your phone down and concentratedly listen to 5 minutes of music.
Any particular music?
No. That would be silly if I specified what kind of music. I mean, okay. Art music.
Art music,
yeah.
Okay.
Which maybe reveals my prejudices a little bit. But what I mean is not music which is designed to pander to your basest needs, you know, not commercial music, but music which has sort of some kind of artistic intention behind it, that really exercises your ears, and you know, 5 minutes sounds like a ridiculously small amount, but I think it's more than a lot of music students actually do spend listening to music every day.
Yeah, we're very distracted these days, aren't we?
Yeah, so put your phone down.
Alright.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be different for me. I'd say any music, but I like your focus on the art music. What's your favourite chord?
My favourite chord? Well, the one which it's in my mind at the moment. I mean, I like that kind of stacked third kind of chord. But
tell us about that, yeah?
Well, you know, who doesn't really? I mean, it's...
So can you play that again so we can...
Okay, so if I put it up the octave so it's easier to hear. Let me have a look. So we've got an F, a C, an E flat, a G, and a B.
So it's like there's no third.
Yeah, there's no third. There could be a third. So that's a dominant ninth chord. And then if you add the B, with the dominant ninth, what you have is you've got major thirds and minor thirds alternating, don't you? Well, not quite. You've got major third, minor third, minor third, major third. If you add another major third, you get what is essentially a chord which doesn't really fit into any one key.
You've got a tritone as well with the F and the B.
Yeah, so you've got the tritone between the root of the chord and the top note. Or if you think of it in terms of a scale, it's the sharpened fourth of the scale. But you've also got the flat seventh, so it's a sort of mixed chord. If you put it into a scale,
so it's like a mixolydian, was it?
Mixolydian and Lydian mixed
Together.
yeah. Which I have heard it said that Chopin has used that kind of scale, and that there is some Polish folk music which uses both the sharpened fourth and the flat seventh within one melody. But I haven't researched it. I'm not a musicologist, so yeah. But you know, in general, asking me what's my favourite anything, I'd say I don't really believe in favourites.
So you don't have a favourite ice cream or anything like that?
No, no. I think, you know, what's my favourite composer? That's an even sillier question, I think.
Oh.
I think it's because we go through periods of liking one particular things, don't we? We have periods of. So I think a more useful question is, what has really been interesting you recently?
Okay. What would you like to tell us about that?
Oh well, I have to think a bit. Putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
I think. Writing. I've been trying to find more creative, inventive ways of making sonic or using textures. I've been trying to be more creative about the way I use texture and timbre in my music. So I've been listening to composers which use more are more inventive with that aspect of
texture,
instrumental writing. Yeah, instrumental colour, that kind of thing.
So by timbre you mean different instruments and maybe different parts of different instruments?
Different performance, different performance techniques, that kind of thing.
And texture?
Texture is kind of the way you combine different... Well, texture is basically what is going on in the music. What kind of accompaniment do you have? Do you have a melody or don't you? What sort of timbres, what sort of sounds are being made, and how that all adds up to make a whole. That's the texture. So
combining instruments, so that could be polyphony, it could be homophony.
Yeah, it could be polyphonic, it could be homophonic, so composers who I think are interesting in that respect, Jarel, Boulez, Grise, so lots of kind of French composers or Western European composers. Yeah, but also Chinese music. Chinese music is very important in that respect. The sounds of Chinese traditional instruments.
So are we talking Beijing or Peking opera kind of music, or?
Absolutely. I mean, the sound of Beijing opera is so out of this world for a Westerner, for a Western composer.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I encountered that was on my first trip, in fact my first day in China in 2008. I came with a choir from Oxford and we did a tour around China. And the first day in the hotel in Beijing, I just turned on the TV and it just happened to be some Beijing opera, some Peking opera. And I thought, what the hell is this? It sounds like something written by an avant-garde 20th century composer. Kind of expressionistic vocalizations, wild, clashy percussion, really spare texture, no harmony. I mean, it's a very different world. So that kind of thing, yeah, I've been doing a lot of listening to traditional Chinese music recently. Another thing I like is something called nanguan.
What's nanguan?
Nanguan is a Taiwanese traditional musical form. It also exists on the mainland. On the mainland it's called Nanyin, it's called Fujianese Nanyin, which literally means southern sound. So it's just a kind of traditional folk music from the south.
And what would that include? What instruments would that have?
So it usually has a pipa, which is like a guitar kind of instrument, a xiao, which is
it's like a
vertical flute. Yeah, it's like a vertical flute rather than a transverse flute. And I think there'd be a sanxian, which is like a 3-stringed guitar instrument, and then a percussion. There's usually extremely sparse percussion, just say wood blocks, or a kind of clapper, which I think is actually played by the singer. So the singer plays and sings, and it's I said it's a folk form. It's actually, I suppose it's more like a kind of courtly art music, which narrates stories. It's almost like a kind of epic storytelling form. And a typical nanguan piece would be between 14 and 20 minutes long. So it's, yeah. But it's an amazing sound world. All of these different. There are so many different types of traditional music in China.
Yeah, I must admit, I've been in China for a while, and
yeah.
I've never kind of put Beijing or Peking opera in that way.
Right.
I mean, it's exactly what you said, but I guess for me it's just been something that I've kind of taken for granted without thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you put it like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Couple more questions and then we'll be finishing.
Okay.
Who do you think is the most overrated composer? And I don't want you to say somebody that we know so we get in trouble.
I don't think I'm in a position to cast judgment on that, actually. I know I've got a friend whose judgment I do trust a lot, who thinks that Stravinsky is the most overrated composer. Isn't this just a question of taste, really?
Could be.
I mean, beyond a certain point of objective evaluation of technical ability, it does ultimately come down to taste, and although you can develop your taste by listening to more, I think ultimately you would still find people with equally vast knowledge and experience of music with completely different tastes. So I don't think it's particularly meaningful to talk in that way, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, it's okay. Yeah. And, well, just to kind of stir the pot even more, who do you think is the most underrated composer?
Underrated composer?
Yeah.
Well, again, it's very subjective. I would really love just talking about China, I would love more Chinese people to know about British contemporary music. And it's completely understandable that they don't, for historical reasons. Historically, Chinese students have tended to go abroad. If they go abroad, they've tended to go to Germany or France or Russia, and in recent years, America much more as well. So Britain, also for kind of social reasons, because in Britain the fees are so high and there aren't so many scholarships. It's much harder to go there and study. And so British music is not so well known in China. So I think, as a whole, I think British music is underrated in China.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you care to name a few composers?
Yeah, Burt Whistle, Michael Finney. I think Brian Ferneyhough is underrated, actually. I think people know about Brian. He's become a bit of a talisman. He's become a sort of a... He's known for writing complicated music.
Yeah.
And that reputation might actually cause some people to take him for granted or even dismiss him. You know, both reactions are possible. I actually think he's a very important composer, a really amazing composer, actually. Yeah.
And by way of disclosure, some of these were your teachers?
Well, Michael Finney, who is an amazing composer as well, objectively amazing, was my teacher. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And my last thing, if somebody wanted to contact you or get more information about you, where should they go?
Go to my website. Because I've been working really hard on my website recently. I've been getting through the backlog of many years of recordings and videos of pieces of mine. They're all up on my website now, or the links are on my website. So you can go to my website, find posts about my pieces, and I've written little write-ups about each piece, so there's some information there about the background to the piece. And then there'll be YouTube links and links to audio files on Bandcamp as well. So, and for Chinese users, there's the Youku as well, because YouTube's blocked in China. So, as we all know, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Great, thank you.
All right.